So thank you all for joining us for the Nature of Winter with the Mass Audubon. The nature of Massachusetts is filled with seasonal mysteries waiting to be uncovered. Have you ever wondered which animal left tracks in the snow? What happens to pond animals under a layer of ice? Or what trees are lining the trails on your winter walks? This online program will introduce the seasonal dynamics of nature in winter and provide ideas and resources for observing, appreciating, and supporting wildlife near your home this winter. And it's led by Patti Steinman, who's the education coordinator for Mass Audubon's Connecticut River Valley Sanctuaries, based out of Arcadia, all the way in East Hampton and Northampton. She has worked at Mass Audubon for 30 years, developing and overseeing programs for adults, families, and children. And she currently oversees Arcadia's outdoor nature preschool. So all 100 plus, let's give a big virtual round of applause to Patti for joining us this morning. And Patti, you can take it away. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Robert, and thank you. Thank you to, looks like we have the neighbor right in Holyoke, right down the road from us. And I think Portland, Oregon is probably the furthest. So thank you all for coming. So the nature of winter. We're going to be talking tonight. First, I'm going to show you just an acknowledgement and gratitude slide. Then we're going to be talking a little bit about when winter is. So if we look outside today, most of us probably see that it is winter. We have snow on the ground, but we'll talk about some of the definitions. As Robert said, we'll get into the winter trees. Winter is actually, a good time to learn to identify trees. Sorry about that. My finger, I think, was a little bit too quick on the mouse. We'll talk a little bit about what wildlife does in the winter to survive, some of their strategies. So I call that MASH, M-A-S-H. We'll learn what each of those letters stands for. We are Mass Audubon, so we will talk a lot about winter birds. And then we'll end just with a little bit about how to explore nature safely in winter. So I'm just going to pause for just a minute to let you read this. And move on. So winter, if we look at winter, at the definitions, the meteorological winter is December, January, and February. The astronomical winter begins on the solstice, which is either December 21st or 22nd. This year, it's December 21st, so that's next week at 4:48 p.m. So this is the time when the sun travels the shortest distance through the sky, and therefore we have the least amount of daylight and the longest evening of the year. So cultures throughout the world celebrate the solstice with different light celebrations. The winter is also a time, certainly as we all know, when the temperatures drop. So the average temperature in Boston is usually between 30 and 40 degrees during the day, and certainly drops well below freezing at night. So there's our winter is also a good time to be able to do some stargazing. So over here, we have one of the most popular, or the most well-known, I should say, constellations, Orion the Hunter, which is thought to be the most recognizable constellation in the world. Orion lies on the celestial equator, making it visible from both the northern and southern hemispheres. It rises in the east on December evenings. Orion's belt, those three stars, is very recognizable. So again, a good time to begin to look at stars on a cold winter evening. So winter trees. In the winter, the trees do become dormant. So they're certainly still alive. And it's important for them to retain the moisture which is inside. So inside, there's all sorts of chemical processes going on. There's chemicals, there's moisture, and the tree does not want anything inside the moisture to get out. On the other hand, it also doesn't want the cold to get inside. So the bark is the outside layer that we see, has a very important job to protect the tree, to protect things from getting out and protect things from getting in. Everything about the bark is really made as an adaptation to protect the tree. So that is the bark, again, is the first line of defense against the cold. If it gets really warm during the day and cold at night, it can cause freezing and thawing. So even the color of the bark can help to prevent that. So in looking at trees, we're probably most familiar with that we have conifer trees or evergreens and deciduous trees. So the conifers keep their needles throughout the winter. Actually, that probably wasn't a good thing to say. They lose their needles, but they don't lose them all at once. But they do certainly have several of them during the winter. And that is an adaptation. It gives them a head start in spring. The deciduous trees lose their needles or lose their leaves during the winter. So we're going to take a look at the deciduous trees. So deciduous, just like our teeth, we lose our baby teeth, which I was surprised when I went to the dentist. I still have a deciduous tooth in my mouth. And the dentist referred to it, instead of saying you still have a baby tooth, referred to it as you still have a deciduous tooth. Like the leaves that fall off in the fall, our teeth are called deciduous as well. A tree loses them, as we mentioned, to reduce the water loss. There's something which is called an abscission layer. So during the fall, that the deciduous trees, I should say most of them, will develop this abscission layer, which basically is responsible for pushing the leaves off and then blocking off where the leaves were, so that moisture, nothing can get out and nothing can get in. Where it drops the leaf, that's called a leaf scar. And we'll get into some of those in just a few minutes. But surprise, there's some deciduous trees that seem to keep their leaves all winter long. So if you drive down the highway, or if you look outside, maybe in your backyard, you might see some deciduous trees. Question, why do they still have their leaves? These are the oaks and the beech trees. So these trees do not form that abscission layer that I was talking about a minute ago. They're also in the same family. And one thought is that these trees originated in the South, so they did not have to have that adaptation of dropping their leaves. So here's the beech tree right over here. And here's the oak. Eventually, these leaves will fall off, possibly during winter storms. The leaves are actually dead. So there might be some wind, maybe a heavy rainstorm or snowstorm that will drop them off. And if they keep them until spring, then the new leaves coming up in spring, the buds, I should say, will just push them right off in the springtime for the new ones to grow. So now we're going to talk a little bit about the conifer or the evergreen trees. So they do have needles. So the needles are long and thin with a type of a waxy coating. And that actually is an adaptation to also help prevent moisture loss. The needles protect the inner leaf, allowing for nutrients to flow from the stem. And it's an advantage to have some needles or some leaves in the springtime, so that they can get a head start on photosynthesizing with new growth in the spring. So the shape of the leaves, or the thinness of them, actually helps to prevent the heavy snow from breaking the branches. Some trees actually act as thermometers. If you look outside, if you have rhododendrons, you might see that they will fold over in the really cold days. So it was 10 degrees here when I got up this morning. If I had a rhododendron, I would look out and see how the leaf was actually folded over. And that's thought to be an adaptation, again, to prevent it from freezing. So it's thought that the curling prevents rapid freezing and thawing of the leaves, which prevents damage. Here's probably our most common evergreen tree that we can see in the winter. This is a eastern white pine. The eastern white pine has the looking needles. And if you were to look closely at the eastern white pine, you could see that the needles are all attached together in a little bundle that we can see in the far right picture. And there's 5 needles to a bundle in white pines. So that's a good way to identify the white pine. There's 5 letters to the word white, and then there's 5 needles over there. Eastern white pines were also considered to be the king's tree. When our country was settled, the colonists came over and marked the white pines to be used in England for masts on ships. There are also those needles over there are thought to be really good if you make a tea out of them. They're supposed to have more vitamins in a glass of white pine tea than a glass of orange juice. I must say, though, I've tried it and I do prefer orange juice in taste. So winter is a good time to learn how to identify trees by certain characteristics, most of which begin with B. So we can look at the branching pattern, we can look at the bark, and we can look at the buds in the winter time, and then the habitat as well. So looking at this picture over here, or the little diagram, we can see, I'm just going to try to get my laser printer and see right over here. So one of the best ways to identify trees is to recognize their branching pattern. So most of the trees are actually this middle one, which is alternate. So if you look at the stem, the branches are coming out alternate from one another. So this is most of our trees here in New England. If you look at, so this picture is, and then if you look over at this one over here, there's some which are opposite. So if you were to stand up and put your arms right across from each other, that's like, and your body was the trunk of the tree, this would be opposite. There's very few of our native trees that are opposite branching. Most are alternate. And then there's some, mostly the evergreens, that are whorled. So the branches come from throughout the. So that's the first thing to do in looking at identifying a tree, actually, be it in winter or be it any other season as well. And then, as I mentioned, certainly looking at the bark and the buds. And then habitat is just a really important thing in terms of any type of identification. Whoops, this is not letting me go on. Let me just get rid of this. There we go. So the opposite ones, and excuse me 1 minute, I'm just gonna try to get rid of this laser printer because I think when I have it on, it doesn't let me put up, or doesn't let me see my animations, because I wanted to have you guess which one was opposite, but it put it right there. So the opposite ones are maple, ash, and dogwood. If we take the letter of the first letter of each of those, we spell the word mad. opposite trees are by no means mad. However, it's a good way to remember that the opposite ones that we have here in New England, maple trees, ash trees, and dogwood. Those are trees. There's an awful lot of shrubs that are opposite as well, but we're putting our focus on the trees. Alternate would be most of our other trees that are deciduous trees that we have. So the oaks, we have more species of oaks than any other family, and they are definitely alternate. The hickory, the birch, the aspen, all of those are alternate. So again, kind of looking and seeing the leaf pattern is very important. Then looking at the bark. So the bark on these trees are two birch trees. And you can see those long lines. Those are called lenticels. Lenticels are used for air exchange. So for getting air inside and outside. Some trees have really prominent or really easily distinguished lenticels. Some you can't see, but on the birch, we can look at the bark and we can see those lines or those lenticels. So those are pretty easy to help us to identify a birch tree. We do have several types of birch trees in our area. So the one on the left is the white birch. Those little black things, those are called chevrons. They kind of look like mustaches. The one on the right is a yellow birch. And the yellow birch is very flaky. The bark is very flaky. It also has, is like a bronze color. And if you can just think of this with the sun shining on it, it almost sparkles. So this would be the yellow birch. Which can look very much like the black birch as well, but the yellow birch always has that bronze coloration to it. And this one, I'm not going to tell you the name of this one, but if you look at the picture on the left over there, look at the bark. And if you know the name of it, don't put it in the chat yet. If you don't know the name and you are going to name this tree just by looking at the bark, you can put it right in the chat. And if there's no responses and you know the name, you can now put it in the chat. Some names make sense, some names don't make sense. This is one which I believe does.
We have cider, shaggy, hickory, shagbark, shaggy hemlock, shagbark hickory, shagbark hickory.
Oh, okay, thank you, Robert. Well, the shagbark hickories got it. And it sounded like folks who may not have known the name of this called it shaggy or shag, which is great. So this is the shagbark hickory, probably the most common hickory in the eastern forests here. And this one is actually the most fire resistant of trees. So that shagginess of the bark has certainly many functions, but one thing is to almost act like a radiator and just radiate if there's fire that's in its area. And it certainly can grow in habitats that are prone to fires. So this is the shagbark hickory. It's also interesting, there is a bird called the brown creeper, which makes its nest underneath the shaggy bark of the hickory. So pretty specific to where it would make its nest. On the right, this is the bud of the shagbark hickory. So a pretty big bud. And also the bud itself is fairly shaggy as well. Bring us into the buds over here. So this picture that I have over here, this How to Be a Tree Detective, I have been using this for decades. This is from a Mass Audubon publication that some folks may be familiar with, an old book called The Curious Naturalist. It was probably done in the 1980s, but I always go back to that for a lot of references, a great little book. But looking at the diagram on the left, we can see the bud and we can see that the end of the bud is called the terminal bud. So looking at the bud to be able to identify the tree, you can see right below the bud in both the picture and in the photograph on the right, you can see that that little thing below that, I hesitate to put my laser on because it takes away my ability to do some of the slides. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about it. But right below the bud, you can see that's called the leaf scar. So that's where the leaf was attached to the twig. And inside that, on the right, you can see two things that almost look like two eyes and a mouth. So this picture almost looks like a little monkey face. So this is the bud actually of a bitternut hickory. And again, looking at that looks almost like a little monkey face. You can see also on the picture below the little leaf scar, you can see those little dots. Those are lenticels as well. So again, used for air exchange. And if you go back to the picture on the left, you can see down on that right-hand column, all the different types of leaf scars. So a good way to identify trees in the winter is to be looking for those leaf scars. And some of them really are pretty animated like this one. And then the buds, the picture on the left is the American beech tree, and the buds are long and thin. They're our longest, thinnest buds. So a way to identify the beech is by some of those leaves that are left on in the winter, and those buds, those long, thin buds. The bud on the right, or the branch on the right, it's actually not a tree, but it's a shrub. It's a viburnum called a hobble bush. And if anybody remembers, I'm going to be aging myself. If anybody else like me may remember on the TV, you had the rabbit ear antennas. That's what this reminds me of. So this is a type of a viburnum, which is a shrub called hobble bush. Another name, common name that you may hear it referred to is called nannyberry as well. And then, as I mentioned, habitat is a really important way to identify trees. So this habitat over here, we have hemlock trees, we have yellow birch, we also have beech, which is to the left, that gray bark tree. So this would be a northern hardwood forest. And these are the trees that we would find there. Winter is a good time to look for evidence in the trees as well. On the left, we have what's called an oak gall. So a gall, and usually left by an insect, and it is where the adult laid the eggs, left the eggs there over the winter, and in the spring, the eggs will hatch, and then the young will eat the food, which the parent actually, it's almost like she stung the leaf and left a chemical which caused a swelling, which would turn into food. So that's underneath that hard covering that you see. So the young will hatch, eat the food, and then they break through. The gall is actually caused, again, the insect laid the egg, but the tree had a chemical reaction which helped to create kind of the outside of the gall in basically to protect itself. So the gall is created by the insect, but the tree actually has a part in creating it for its own protection. And they're usually not detrimental to trees. You can find some with many, many galls on them, and the galls are all very specific to the certain type of tree or plant. So this again is the oak gall. Down below, you can see where it was broken open for the insect to be able, it was broken open, and you can actually see that fuzzy stuff was the food that that was left, and the young ate and then came out. And then when they come out, they don't break it like that. They're not that strong. They make a tiny little hole. And most galls are caused, again, by insects. Many are caused by wasps. Other are caused by mites. So not an insect, but another invertebrate. On the right, you can see a branch or a twig that was found in the forest, and it had the bark is off, and engraving beetles were underneath the bark. So engraving beetles are found in our forests. There's many of them. They live underneath the bark, and they create these amazing, beautiful little patterns over there. And each pattern is meant for something. So underneath the bark, they have areas where it might be their feeding area. They might have an area, a section, which would be their egg laying area. But everything is meant for something. So normally bark would be covering, so we wouldn't see this. So important to leave bark on the tree, on the trees, even if they've fallen. Okay, so now we're going to give you a little quiz over here. So if you can identify this tree. So you don't have to do it yet, and actually once you figured it out, you can put it in the chat. But a few clues. So we can see that this tree has lost its leaves in the winter. So it is deciduous. This picture over here shows you what their leaves would look like actually in the fall. Looking at this, it's opposite. So that's a big hint. So remember that, mad. 3 trees that we have that begin with an M. And you can just put in the chat once you think you know what it is. And in the late winter and early spring, this tree grows very odd growth forms that look like buckets. So what is this tree? One of our New England favorites.
Oh boy, they're coming in fast and furious.
Okay.
Maple, sugar maple, sugar maple. The bucket tree, maple sugar, maples,
Great.
sugar maple. Please
Perfect.
tell me it's sugar maple, Patti.
It's the bucket tree. I like that. It is sugar maple, or also known as the bucket tree. So sugar maples in the late spring, this is what they will be looking like. And it's, of course, the sap which is in there. And the sugar maple has the highest concentration of sap. I'm sorry, the highest concentration of sugar in their sap. And that's why we tap this one to get the maple syrup. Black birch actually has the second highest, and people can actually tap black birch trees as well. I'm sad that with climate change, it's predicted that that it will have an effect on the sugar maples, and that they'll be moving their range further north. So in southern New England, they'll probably be in the next decades or so, there'll probably be less maple tapping here, whereas there definitely will be more, or certainly in Canada and further north, there definitely is some now, and hopefully the maples will be doing okay there, but unfortunately very susceptible to climate change. Okay, very good. Everybody passed that test. So now we're going to get into our MASH. What does wildlife do in the winter? And here's a picture of a barred owl, like dead center in this picture over here. And this was actually taken right outside. I looked outside my office window, and it was pretty amazing to see this bird. But MASH. So there's an M, there's an A, there's an S, and there's an H. And I'm going to give you the M. So the M stands for migration. So the other three, the A, the S, and the H are all strategies, things that wildlife do to survive the winter. So if you want to just take a minute and write down what you think the A, the S, and the H could stand for. And you'll probably come up with some that are not what I had in mind, but that work perfectly well as adaptations.
Okay, hibernate, hibernation, hibernation, hunting, hunker down, hibernation, hide,
Perfect.
hibernate.
As I said, you're definitely coming up with more that work, but are not what I had in mind, but absolutely do work. I like that. Hiding, hunting. Okay. But we're going to go through these. So migration, active. So the A would be for the many critters that are actually active in the winter. Some are sleepers. So another word for sleeper is torpor that I'll be using interchangeably. And then the hibernation. But again, I love those others that folks put down. So migrate, the true meaning of migrate means to go one place for a season and then to return. So it's a strategy that animals will use, certainly if they need to. It doesn't come without its dangers. So a lot of these, think of the birds, think of this little monarch butterfly and how far they go for hundreds or even in some cases thousands of miles. And along their their migration route, there's a lot of dangers, be it storms, be it predators, be it any other type of weather conditions, be it cell towers. So there's a lot of things that can be very detrimental to them. So they're not going to do it unless they need to. So they would need to if they can't find protection and they can't find food. So protection in both having their own adaptations on them, warmth, or providing protection in terms of their habitat and providing enough safety. So certainly many of our birds are the ones that we think of for migrating. Also our monarch butterfly migrates. There's 3 mammals and only 3 that are true hibernators that live in New England. So if you want to write those in the chat, and these are true hibernators. And a true hibernator's body temperature goes down significantly. Their metabolism and their heart rate go down. So there's others that are that second, we had that other, the word for the S, the sleepers or the torpor. But the true hibernators are, and you can write it in the chat.
Yeah. Bears, bear, chipmunk, bear, salamanders, black bear, frogs, lizards, black bear, bears, skunks, possum, bear, woodchuck, turtle, snake, chipmunks.
Okay. Great. Okay. So with the mammals, so those folks who mentioned the amphibians, I think there were some frogs and salamanders. So you are absolutely right. When it comes to the mammals, this may surprise you. The woodchuck, and I know Robert mentioned that somebody wrote down the woodchuck. So the woodchuck is definitely one. The meadow jumping mouse. So not all mice, but just one, the meadow jumping mouse and the little brown bat. So we have 7 species of bats. Just one of them, the little brown bat, is a true hibernator here. Others will move north, and so they'll migrate and hibernate. But the little brown bat hibernates here. The meadow jumping mouse, many species of mice, certainly not the house mouse, which may be active in our house, but meadow jumping mouse, and then the woodchuck or groundhog, same critter. So those are the only 3 that are true hibernators. So many of you were very close in putting down the black bear, but the black bear does not have all of those qualifying factors that I mentioned a minute ago. Their body temperature goes down, but not significantly. A female bear actually has her cubs in the winter. So if you're a mother out there, you probably know that that would be a hard thing to sleep through. So they do go into a semi-hibernation. So again, their body temperature goes down, their metabolism goes down some. On a warm day, they may get up and they may actually be active. If you put bird feeders out, then you are probably aware that on some winter days, it's not impossible at all to see a hungry bear out there eating the food. So they are what we call semi-hibernators. So again, the true hibernator, their body temperature goes down significantly, heart rate, respiration go way, way down. And torpor or sleeper is a period of inactivity with lower body temperature. And that can be a period from days, for basically days or weeks. And again, on warm days, many of those critters can be active. Some birds, like the chickadee and the kinglet and the juncos, they will go into a torpor state as well. So not exclusive just to the mammals. So our sleepers, the ones that we can also say semi-hibernate or torpor, this would be the skunk and the raccoon. And then I think a few people mentioned the chipmunk as well, which I'm sorry, I did not put a picture of over there. And then there's the active critters. So there's a lot that certainly are very active. And for them, staying around, they're not migrating, so they're not going to a nice warm place. They're not hibernating, going deep below, but they're staying around and they're being subject to the elements. So they have many adaptations as well. Again, someone put the H for, I like that they used hunt, and they certainly, these active ones need to well equipped at hunting for their food and for finding it. So the coyote, the bobcat, this is a white-throated sparrow that you may see at your feeders. The moose, we'll get into the moose in just a minute, but the moose is definitely a critter of the winter season. And while the chipmunk is one of those sleepers or torpor, the squirrels, the gray squirrel and the red squirrel and the flying squirrels are all active during the winter. So a few little rules here. So Allen's rule is that with appendages, that limbs and ears of animals in the cold are usually shorter than those of the same species in warm climates. So the more compact and the shorter the animal, the lower the surface area. So that's an adaptation. And then there's Bergman that says that within a given species of population in colder areas, there'll be larger animals than those in warmer areas. And again, that larger body will have a lower surface ratio area, as we can see in these foxes over here. So the moose. The moose is the mammal which is so well adapted to the winter, everything about it. Unfortunately, that means that the moose also is an animal that does not do well in warm climates. And just like we talked about the sugar maple, this is an animal that will be certainly moving north with climate change. Moose in Massachusetts are just the past few decades or so, they've been moving into Massachusetts. So we certainly do have some here. We don't have huge populations, but we certainly have them. So the moose has a very large body. So as we talked about large body, that surface area is an adaptation. It grows thick insulated fur in the winter time. So the fur of a moose is hollow, as our many other mammals develop that thicker fur, which is hollow. So that allows a layer of air in to help keep them warm. Think of layering effect that we might do in putting clothes on. They have dark fur, so that absorbs the sun. They have a layer of fat. They have long legs, which allows them to travel through the deep snow. They can travel up to 35 miles per hour. Their hooves allow them to stay on top of the snow. They have an excellent sense of both hearing as well as smelling. They don't travel as far in the winter, so that conserves energy. They often will travel in the direction of the wind so that their scent is not given off. They shed their antlers. Those would be pretty heavy if you had to carry them around in the winter and survive as well. And their nasal passage is designed to heat the air when it's inhaled so that it can help warm up their lungs. So they are definitely well adapted. Rabbits are around in the winter. They can jump. We can see that this is their pattern over here. And you can see the bigger little paw prints. Those are their back prints. The two smaller ones are their front prints. Hop, they actually push off with their back feet. So they're pushing off, and and actually this is probably not the best of pictures to show you because this is one that was standing still. So the back feet are showing in the back over here with the two smaller prints. Those are the front, and those are in the front. But when they hop, they'll push off. So actually those big ones will come in the front. The snowshoe hare, not a rabbit, but closely related. This is an animal which is found in northern New England, also the hill towns or the higher elevations of Massachusetts. So this is an animal that depends on snow. When its fur changes, it's not an abracadabra fur change, but basically in the fall, as the day length changes and according to day length, it begins to lose its brown fur. So it sheds the brown and the white fur grows in. So the timing of the color change is really important to it. It has those big back feet that it uses again to push off and is a good survivor of the north. The white-tailed deer, just like the moose, it actually grows darker fur. This picture was probably taken in the fall, but its fur will come in a little bit darker. There we go. And it's also very thick and insulated. The deer will also yard up so that they'll, during the winter time, the fawns, the does, and the bucks, or the males, females, and fawns, will all stay together in an area, pat down the snow, and they'll stay in a smaller home range than they normally would have. And normally, outside of winter, the does and bucks are in separate areas. So this is something that you might see in the winter. This is evidence of a mammal. And this is one that will take its food and it will take pine cones and other nuts that it gathers in the winter, hickory, acorns, hemlock, and it will make a big pile of the scales or the leftover. And it will also hide some of the green cones so that it has food for the winter. And this is the red squirrel. So this is something you might see in the winter. And I'm going to move on to birds right now. And we have our birds that we can see by our feeders in the winter. And this would be our state bird in Massachusetts. This is our black-capped chickadee. So these are all birds that you can see if you put your feeders up. This is the tufted titmouse. I think folks are probably all familiar. This is that was the cardinal. And this beautiful bird is the white-throated sparrow. So this is one that we don't find around here in the summer, unless you're in really high elevations or if you're in northern New England, but they come down to southern New England in the winter, and they're a great feeder bird. The one on the left, the far left, is the downy woodpecker, and the one on the same suet is the red-breasted nuthatch, and the one on the right is the red-bellied woodpecker. This is one that we'll be seeing more of with climate change. The red-bellied woodpecker is an example of a bird that's moved its range north. 30 years ago, it would be unusual to see one. And this is one that we can see at our feeders. This is the Carolina wren. And one of my favorite winter birds is the junco, the dark-eyed junco. And people are often surprised that you can actually see robins in the winter as well. So again, it's all about food and protection. They have warm feathers to keep them warm. They will switch their diet from eating worms or invertebrates to eating berries, so fruit that's remained on the trees. And in the winter, we often have robins from the north that come down to Massachusetts to be able to find some of these food sources. And then some winters we have what's called eruptive birds. So these are birds called pine grosbeaks. These are birds of the tundra, the far north. So these birds, you may also hear of purple finches, of American redpolls, pine siskins. So these are birds that don't nest in our area, but are northern species and come down in the winter time on certain years. If they can't find food, if the seed crop is not in abundance in the far north, these are the years when they come down to southern Massachusetts, and birders are very delighted when they're able to see these birds. One such bird is also the snowy owl. It's usually the young snowy owls that come down in the winter looking for food here, and they've often the adults will stay in their northern or their tundra areas. The birds have pretty amazing adaptations as well. The chickadee's brain actually grows in the late summer and early fall, so that in the later fall, they store or catch their seeds and they store them so that they have them in the winter time. It's pretty amazing. So the hippocampus part of their brain actually grows, so they have that memory. Other things that birds will do to survive is to fluff up. So the birds over here, the bluebirds on the right, are puffing up and they're getting that layer of air inside. So kind of like us putting on layers. Other things that they'll do is stand on one leg. I'll get into that in just a second. So this is counter-current exchange. So basically, the cold blood from their feet travels through their brains close to their artery and warms the blood. So their feet otherwise would seem to get very, very cold. So this actually helps to reduce heat loss. So you may see birds along the coast. You may see birds actually anywhere where they're holding up one of their feet so that it's actually a way to be able to get heat to their feet to keep them from freezing. Other adaptations that birds will do is to sun themselves. And the location, everything that they do about this is meant to be able to absorb that solar energy. So this is a little red-faced screech owl, which is just absorbing that sunlight to keep it warm. Some birds, like the ruffed grouse, will tunnel underneath the snow in very, very cold weather. Pretty amazing. They may change their diet as well. And I think one of the most amazing birds in the winter is the golden-crowned kinglet, a tiny, tiny, tiny bird, much smaller, half the weight of a chickadee, a tiny bird. And this bird has amazing adaptations. This is the kinglet again. It fluffs its feathers, it travels in flocks. It never seems to stop moving and stop eating. That's by day. At night, it can actually go into that torpor for days at a time. It can go underneath the snow. It shivers. It can shelter with others. So amazing things. The crows in the winter, they will gather with others in huge roosts. In fact, we have many crows from the north that will come down to the winter into our area in the winter. And there's locations throughout the state in Lawrence, that's probably closest to Tewksbury, in Worcester, in Springfield. In the wintertime, you may see thousands of birds, and there could be 10,000 birds that go to the same location, winter roost, and are together to help survive the winter. And before you know it, some birds, like the eagle in mid-March, they're already beginning to establish their nests. So underneath this ice, there's all sorts of critters that live underneath the ice. Most frogs survive northern winters by hibernating deep underneath the water in ponds and lakes and streams. They're cold dormant, but their body temperature never falls below freezing. Turtles would do the same, many turtles would do absolutely the same thing. The picture on the right is a red-spotted newt, a type of salamander, which is actually active underneath the ice. So you can see them swimming underneath the ice. Underneath the snow and underneath the ice, you can see a lot of insect larvae. The picture on the right, that is a dragonfly nymph. So they can be active or they can be hibernating underneath the muck of the ice. The fish and the turtles, as we mentioned, the turtle can be hibernating. They'll also take oxygen inside so that they'll take oxygen bubbles, I should say, down with them to help them to survive. The wood frog actually has a type of antifreeze in its body. So it helps it from freezing. And it actually, I should say, it will almost freeze, but because it has that antifreeze in it, it actually won't be it won't damage the cells. And then tracking is something that we're all is a fun thing to do in the summer, in the winter time. Something to do to look at the tracks is to look at the pattern of the tracks. So there's 4 main patterns. The one on the left is the hopper. So this is like the picture that I showed you of the rabbit tracks. So the hopper will have 2 feet in the back, 2 feet in the front, and will often push off those back 2 feet so that the big front ones, the big back ones land in the front. So we can see that in the picture to the left over here. But their pattern is of hopping. So it's often difficult to actually see the individual track, but to look at the pattern is a good way to begin to study tracking. Down below, we have the bounders. So this would be the otters, the short-tailed weasel, long-tailed weasel, the river otter, the fisher. They're all in that category. So these are bounders. So and think of an inchworm with a bounder, as they're actually not out in the winter, but think of the pattern, how an inchworm moves. They place their front feet down, and in one motion, they leap forward by lifting their front feet and putting their rear feet in the exact spot where the front feet are. And this is the pattern, how it appears. And then our last 2, so the one on the left would be called a waddler. So these are the heavy-bodied animals. So what they're doing is moving the left side of their body first, and then the right side. So this is what you can see: the bear, the porcupine, and the raccoon are all waddlers. And then on the right, we have the walking pattern or the zigzag or straight pattern. This is what the deer, the members of the dog and the cat family do. And the members of the wild dog and cat, so the foxes, the coyotes, the bobcats, they usually do something called perfect stepping, where their front feet will land where their back feet were. And it usually ends up being like a straight line. A domestic dog or a cat will do a similar pattern. However, it's usually not as much of a straight line. They don't need to conserve energy as do the wild members of the canines and the feline family, the cats and the dogs. So they're usually more of a wandering pattern. And here's a picture of some of the tracks of some of the animals over here. So one thing to do is to count the number of toes. So some toes, unlike us, where we have 5 fingers and 5 toes in our feet and hands, some will have a different number from their front feet to their hind feet. So look at the number of toes, and then look at also some have claws, some don't have claws. And there's a lot of good information out there where you can get some good tracking information, some good tracking sheets such as these. And we can't end winter without saying that there's actually some insects who are around. So snow fleas are one of the oldest orders of insects, and they look like tiny little, almost like ashes, little dots. They are tiny, 1/10 of an inch long, and they are over 400 million years old. You can see huge numbers of them, and you can see them just as little dots on the snow. So keep your eyes out for these snow fleas, which are a member of the springtail family. Just a few words about exploring winter. So please be sure to keep yourself safe. Recognize that or check the winter conditions, the weather before you go out. Be a gentle and ethical wildlife observer. Know that there's a lot of challenges out there. So if we try to get too close to take a picture or we disturb something, that's just putting more stress on them. Know that there's a lot of things out there, again, that they have to deal with. So just be as ethical as we can. Support wildlife. This is a time where you certainly can be putting bird feeders up. You can enjoy, and you're also helping them, as well as the squirrels. And you ought to enjoy winter. So with that, I apologize. I think I went a little bit over my time, but I will be glad to stay for questions. So I'm just going to stop sharing.
So Patti, a wonderful job as always. Folks, if you have questions, get them in for Patti. We're going to take roughly 8 minutes of questions. Gail wants to know, when do the deer grow their antlers? We have some deer. We have some that have them now. So I guess Gail sees a lot of deer in her yard or in her neighborhood. When do the deer grow their antlers?
Okay, good question. So they grow them in the fall, Gail, usually late summer, early fall, and they want them for what's called rut. So the males have them to basically to be using against other males, defending their territory and looking for a female. And then they shed them usually around Thanksgiving around here.
Joyce says, someone told me that the American coot is a migratory bird seen in the Chestnut Hill Reservoir near where I live. Do they stay here or continue to travel south? How long do they stay in one place during their migration?
Good question, Gail. And I may have to look up some of the details for that, but they usually are not here throughout the winter. So I don't believe they are, I don't think there's been documentation of them nesting here. I think they can be found occasionally in the winter, but I think it's pretty rare. But if you would like me to find the answer to that, I can email it to Robert.
Great. Let's see here. Margaret says, I learned so much. Thank you. Kathy says, thank you. I learned the term geometrid, and I will be using it. Diane says, this was wonderful. I'll watch it again. Thank you very much. Joyce says, wonderful presentation. Marianne says that this was wonderful. I glanced out and I watched a coyote trot by. Patricia says, informative and enjoyable. Lisa would like to know, do coyotes prey on deer?
They would prey, usually if it's a sick or an injured or a younger deer. So they certainly can. They also travel in packs. So it's easier certainly for a pack to go after a deer. But again, it's usually a deer that's compromised.
Carolyn asks, is there a distinction between hibernate and sleeping?
Yes. So hibernate, again, thank you for clarifying that or asking that clarifying question. So hibernating is when, again, it's a really deep sleep. The big thing is that the heart rate goes down, the body temperature goes down significantly. So a sleeper, the body temperature can go down maybe just a few degrees. A woodchuck, for example, the body temperature can go down from like close to 100 degrees to, I think it's 37 degrees. So it goes down significantly in a true hibernator. So think of it as goes down so much, metabolism goes down so much, they really can't move. The only thing that would wake them is if they're in dire stress of basically freezing to death.
E asks, can one tap the sugar maple at home for sap to make syrup?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So you can tap the tree. It takes, I believe it's 30 gallons to boil down to 1 gallon of syrup. So one tree isn't going to get that much, but it's a fun thing to do. I know we at our nature preschool will do it with kids. We don't a gallon, but it's still a fun thing that you can do.
Let's see. Jennifer says, I've learned a lot and will have more success in hunting for photos. Cindy says, great, thank you. I learned a lot. And an anonymous attendee would like to know, do chipmunks tunnel in gutter leads during winter? Gutter leads? I'm not sure. Gutter leaves, maybe? Do chipmunks tunnel in gutter leaves during the winter?
I'm not sure about the gutter, but chipmunks do tunnel in winter. So underneath the ground, they go down, they have like a round hole, very round and about 6 inches in diameter. So that's how you can tell a chipmunk hole. And then it goes straight down where some of the other small rodents or mammals would go to the side. Immediately, a chipmunk goes down several feet. And then the tunnel is this whole network where they're in that torpor state underground. So I'm not sure if the gutter was a typo, but I'm not sure about gutter, but they definitely are underneath the ground.
Jean says, thank you. Very interesting program. Carol says, I loved the branch from the engraving beetle. Did you say that the markings correspond to what they are for example, feeding? In other words, are the shapes of the engravings meaningful?
They are. Yep, they are. So some are where some actually can represent their size. So you can actually follow one as the insect gets bigger. The little lines actually get bigger. Some of them you can follow and you can see that they go to a feeding area or a sleeping area. So the lines definitely do distinguish or determine. And I would also say, I certainly don't take the bark off, but just go for a walk in the woods and look at trees that are down and the bark being disturbed, and you can find these, and they're beautiful.
So we're going to wrap it up there. I'm going to come back to you in 30 seconds, Patti. So if you have any last words, we'll come back to you in a second. Kathy says, thanks again for another wonderful presentation. I look forward to seeing it again. Barbara says, so much information to absorb. My family just bought a house in Western Mass, and I will be the know-it-all for them now. That's good, Barbara.
Great, and Barbara, come visit me at Arcadia.
There you go. Northampton, is that where it is?
Yes, Northampton and East Hampton.
Northampton, yeah. So Patti, any last words for the audience before we wrap it up?
Just thank you all for coming. It's a beautiful day out here. Get out and enjoy. And again, if there's anything I couldn't answer, please send your email to Robert and I will be glad to get back to you. Have a great day, everybody.
Yeah, thank you, Patti. Folks, look for an email from me later today with the recording, with the feedback survey, and with some information about some other upcoming virtual programs. And I promise we'll have Mass Audubon programs in January and February. So thank you all so much, and I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their day. Have a good one, Patti.
You too.
Bye-bye.